Calling the meeting to order, and nope. Yep. So we're going to start with the, this is the work session. So the work session is where we're going to go ahead and work some things out before our regular meeting. And then in our regular meeting, that's when we do our voting. This is when we can pretty much adjust or our schedule, our agenda in a way. And in most cases, our residents just watch us hash it out. And later, if you have any questions or concerns during the meeting, you have your 3 minutes to comment. But this way, it's great for the residents to go on and see what we're bringing forth. If there's a resident that has a dying need and can't sit on their hands and you want to speak, just raise your hand. You can raise it virtually or physically so that we can see and keep order, okay? Thank you. So the next item on our work session agenda is just to go over our flash flood, the update. And Mr. Barnes, if you'll unmute, because I want you to, we both have been communicating, but Mr. Barnes will get information. We get the same emails. He digests it, and we move forward. But we have talked with DPW, and of course our residents know that, and they got the update on the pumping station and how it operates from their point of view. Some of our residents had a different point of view because we're actually here. And for years, such as Mr. Cotton did point out, I believe during that meeting, we've had heavy rains before, and this did not happen. So yeah, we had some major issues. And the thing is, it wasn't just us, but we're all connected. You know, Bladensburg, Riverdale, Colmore Manor, Cottage City, everyone suffered some type of damage, Mount Rainier. And another part of it was the storm drains. So the county does have a lot of work they need to do. And I know that they had that on our list, that project. And we did hear back from DOE in, well, not necessarily, but sort of in reference to that. They did agree to a meeting with us. So we're going to meet with them and talk about that storm drain. And then I also know, and speaking with Ms. McCulley, she reminded me, and I believe Mr. Cotton as well, that there was supposed to be another pumping station in the town of Edmonston. So we have a lot to talk about. And as far as resources, I know that our, as I mentioned before, our Congressman Brown's office is on it. Of course, our county executive, she's on it. The thing is, with like our county executive, there's so many communities that are involved. So I guess she has to stay pretty general. Personally, myself, and I'll speak just a tad bit for Mr. Barnes, we feel that they did not get the gist of the damage that was done in the town of Edmonston. And partly because the form that was online that you're supposed to submit, it didn't work. You enter in all of your information and it wouldn't go through. So they could not, I don't see how they can assess the damage that we had in the town of Edmonston. They went into some homes and they saw the damage, but a lot of our residents quickly, because we provided the dumpsters, quickly, got rid of everything, quickly turned it around. And plus they had to have a place to sleep. They had to have a place to live. So a lot of times there was no delay. By the time the county came out, a lot of the homes were already, in a state where it didn't look as devastating. So I think we were, they shorted us in that way. And then also the form was not, you weren't able to submit your damages. And now it's pulled off and you can't, it's closed. So that's frustrating. And again, we're going to meet with them. We're emailing, and Mr. Barnes and I know our council, we are not happy about that at all. And I'm sure the other municipalities have issue with that as well. They said that Bladensburg had the worst damage, and I'm not taking anything from Bladensburg. That their sister community, love them, support them. But I feel that our residents here had just as much, if not more, damage. I don't know how they saw it. I don't know how they did it, but, and we are still waiting for a report on the pumping station. Mr. Barnes, you want to add to what I've already said, or
just a couple.
Correct anything?
Yeah, just a couple of additions. I know that I've given the information on the Maryland State Insurance Office, Joy Hatchett, that can help and assist residents with insurance claims, that if they're having difficulty with an insurance company, Joy's office is happy to help with that. We can still also have debris picked up by Prince George's County Public Works. Mr. Cotton took advantage of that this past week. And so if anyone has that, please contact Town Hall and we will get that set up and get the Public Works folks out there to pick that up. Just as you said, Mayor, we're talking Department of Environment about upgrading our storm sewer system, but the Public Works did come out and clean all of our storm drains and did not find any blockages, is what they reported on that call. That call will go up on the website this week. I got the recording from Ms. Clerkley, so we'll post it and send it out via Constant Contact also.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Any comments from our council on that? But if not, I really would like to thank the council for just jumping in there and assisting and being present and, you know, just offering to talk with our legislators and just reaching out to our residents, the hard work, all of that. The police department, our public works department, oh my gosh, and Mr. Barnes just getting all of the debris and just taking it, putting it into the roll-offs. It was just, it was wonderful. It was heroic acts by all. And thank you, Mr. Cotton, for providing all of your pictures of the damages, of your damage. And I know that was your damage. That was good because everyone didn't take the time to do that. When you're in that emergency situation, it's like, you know, you're thinking of other things, but it takes that other type of thinker that says, I need to record this or I need to take pictures so that we have something to show and forward them on. So thank you for that. That was really, really good. It was a lot of pictures too. So, so thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And our next item is the final consideration of our ordinance 2020-OR-08, and it's for the approval of the establishment of a police reserve program for the town. And I want to call on the chief to go ahead and just give a summary of this program before we, that's what we'll vote on tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. As discussed in our last meeting about the establishment of a reserve program, this will allow us to maximize our coverage in the town, which we desperately would like to or need to increase. And it allows us to have the benefit of doing so without the same costs associated with having a full-time officer. So these officers will have a policy with about 20 hours a week, like we discussed. But it's the same program like we discussed last month, and we're looking forward to getting it going. We've already gotten approval from the Training Commission to move forward. The last step would be the ordinance to the town.
All right. Any questions from the council on that? I think we all were in agreement of it and like the program. Fantastic. All righty. The next item is going to be the final consideration of ordinance 2020-OR-07, repealing chapters 10, under administration, article 1. And it's our section where we are required to have committees or liaisons. Committees or liaisons for our different departments. just for the sake of a great summary for those who were not here last month. Mr. Barnes?
Your Honor, this is an ordinance that was in place for a long, long time prior to having administrators and department heads. And so the belief is that the committee system wasn't needed, as all 5 of you elected officials essentially serve as that committee for budgeting, for finance review, and can all each have conversations with department heads as needed. So this just eliminates that requirement.
Any concerns from the council? Fantastic. All right, so we'll vote on that tonight as well. And the next item is the final consideration of ordinance 2020 OR-06, amending the Edmiston Town Code Part 1, Administrative Legislation, Chapter 41, Article 41-2, the conflict of interest. And it's just amending it and adding a few items to that conflict of interest ordinance. Mr. Barnes, did you want to just a brief summary?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, as you indicate, this is amending our existing ordinance. This just states that the elected officials and staff cannot use public assets for personal use of any kind. So if you're traveling, you only can use city vehicles to go for business purposes, whether you're attending a meeting or a conference, and then also eliminates any question or concern about scrap metal on dumpster day, allowing that that goes into the trash or goes into recycling with benefit to the town.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, concern from the council or staff? Fantastic. And as we move along, the next item will be our work session minutes, as well as our regular council meeting minutes. Hopefully everyone had an opportunity to review them. And as we will be approving them tonight, are there any questions? Edits, changes?
No.
Thank you, Ms. Chester. I hear ya. All right. And so the next item is the consideration of approval for job descriptions for the police captain, lieutenant, sergeant, corporal, and patrol officers. Did everyone review those? And
I have like 2 questions. One is kind of
Absolutely.
I think a simple question, and one's a little more complicated. So my simple question is, by having approved job descriptions, is that the same as kind of, in a sense, meaning that we have to have those positions filled? Or is it just that should we have those positions filled, these are the approved job descriptions? Does that make sense?
yes, yes, very good question. I know the answer to that, but I'm going to leave that to
okay.
Our town administrator to answer that question.
Okay.
Can also defer to Chief Harris, but yes, the job descriptions are created for various positions that we could or might have in the town. They don't necessarily exist today, but they could, and if we do have them, then they're based on that job description that you're approving to in the list tonight.
Got it.
And
then my other,
well,
sorry.
Ms. Chester, let me let Chief, if he has any additional comments to that.
Sure.
No, I don't have any additional comments. And the positions that we submitted were positions that we currently have, but none of those current jobs have updated descriptions. As Chapter 5 of our personnel manual requires that we periodically review it and update it. So that was the goal here.
And I think, Ms. Chester, the reason I refer to Mr. Barnes is because that will go for any of the positions. So if we had a
Right.
job description, yeah, that's why.
So these are just sort of on file. These are the official job descriptions, should they be vacant, recruiting, filled, what have you.
Right.
Doesn't
Right.
matter.
Doesn't mean that we
Oh.
need all, the police chief presented all of the job descriptions of the captain, lieutenant, sergeant. Doesn't mean that we have to have all of those positions.
Right. And then we did look at, I thought, a position description for the reserve officers last month, and that would go in the same kind of file as these. Is that right? I guess.
That's a good question. So the reserve officers, remember, will still be governed by the job description of what we would expect out of any patrol officer. So that does not change. Their role,
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's the same thing as a regular patrol officer.
Okay. So that would be the same job description. Got it. And then I have two more questions that are maybe a little more complicated. So, one thing I noticed is that we don't have in there any kind of like Spanish or second language as a, not that it would be required, because I understand that I feel like I've asked about that a million times. Just as a preference, is that something that we should or could be putting into job descriptions, that we would prefer that someone have those additional language capacities?
I think for the normally what we do is that we have the job description, but when we do a job announcement and actually put a job out there, we generally put on there bilingual candidates are encouraged to apply, not necessarily preferred. But if we did a job announcement for a particular position, we would put that out. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
And then as a, like, but why aren't we preferring? Like, why isn't that part of the job description? I'm just curious. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious.
Well, there actually is a right or wrong answer to that. And I'm sorry to jump in, but did you want to respond?
No.
Harris? Okay. That you can't prefer a particular language. It's covered.
Equal opportunity employment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, you can't prefer that. When you're putting out a position, it's encouraged. It's encouraged. And then you interview. And if you prefer, once you interview, then that's what you prefer. But when you are posting a position for all to see, it's encouraged.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And is that that's a Maryland state thing? That's a PG County thing? Like, what is that?
Federal?
I want to say it's the law, but I may not be providing. Yes, Mr.
It's
Cotton.
the law.
Yeah, it is the law. If I may,
Yes.
it's a federal law.
Yeah.
In the federal government, we use the phrase, for example, if you look Spanish, those who speak Spanish may apply. It's not encouraged, but it's implied you may apply. And that's been vetted through legal counsel at the federal level. So it is federal law.
But because these are municipal positions, that's the difference. Because we're like, I work for a nonprofit organization, and we absolutely can require a second language. And
Go
that's,
ahead, Ms. Ferguson.
Don't
So-
say that too loud publicly.
I know.
Right.
Well, no.
I know. I was thinking that too.
Don't say that too loud public. Forgive me for intervening, please.
Yeah.
I was in the federal government. That was one of my specialties, civil rights and EEO. And don't say that too loud publicly that you prefer.
well, no,
You get yourself
it's
in
the
a
same.
lot. No,
But the
because
federal government
no federal
Grant
Let me
Maker-
let, I'm sorry, Miss
Anyway.
Chester and Mr. Cotton, let me let Ms. Ferguson, our attorney,
Okay.
jump in there. Her hand has been hot.
flashing.
You're on
Yeah,
fire.
I'm sorry. Forgive me. I'm sorry.
You can, not all discrimination is bad. Is good discrimination at times. It just means you're making a decision based on certain attributes. sometimes having the ability to speak a certain language is an absolute requirement. And the council member is correct about that. Usually if you want to have more of a range of language ability, you'll say Spanish speakers are encouraged to apply, something like that. You would not put that into a job description because it's not required to be an officer for the town. It can be an extra benefit because your residents speak both English and Spanish. And we can recognize that without it being discriminatory in a bad way.
Okay.
Okay, that was good for you.
Yeah. So,
Okay. Did you have something else?
I
Mr.
guess
Cullen?
my other question
Oh.
has to do with, again, I feel like we talked about this a little bit last month, but just the idea that we have all of these officer, not like a patrol officer, but like there's a chief and there's a captain, and there's a lieutenant and then a sergeant and a corporal, and then there's like one patrol officer. And while we are going to maybe have a few more reserve patrol officers, we're not going to suddenly become a much bigger town and need a much bigger police force. And so I guess I'm still just curious about the decision making behind having all of these different supervisory levels and what the advantages of having such a long chain of command with just like one or two people at the bottom rather than a more lateral and not as deep hierarchy, I guess. Yeah.
Chief, that's probably a question for you to answer.
Well, I don't think that we are targeting to. I mean, rank is what it is. I mean, I think that coming in, we wanted to restructure the department as a whole, and I personally have my thoughts on what ranks we actually should have versus that we shouldn't. It's kind of different. It's kind of different in a small municipality like the town of Evanston because all of us have a lot of the same functions. Like the chief normally wouldn't have a patrol function. I have a patrol function. I mean, long term, when we look at our strategic goals for the department, we want to have that streamlined a little bit. But remember, some of those positions I inherited, so you can't just get rid of them. You can't just just get rid of people's rank after they've earned it. So long term, we're looking at a different goal, but we definitely understand what you're saying.
Okay, and I guess now my first question about like whether we have to have these filled or whether we just want to codify what's distinct about the different ranks and their different responsibility levels makes sense. So that maybe feeds into that.
You kind of broke up. Yeah. So the position descriptions that I submitted to you all actually are positions that we currently have in the police department. So that is what was submitted. But it's important that we reclassify those positions and the responsibilities in our department. And I think like we didn't have one for the lieutenant, we didn't have an updated one for a sergeant, for example. And under the Maryland Police Training Commission, those roles actually require certain responsibilities or certain trainings to hold those positions.
Okay.
So we want to make sure that we classify those things and we're in line with the state of Maryland with the requirements of a police department.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Those were really good questions, council members. Thank you.
Chief, I only have one on the descriptions of the officers. You have for corporal, you have the sergeant and higher as their supervisor. You have for patrol officer, you just have sergeant as their supervisor. Is that just a didn't add and higher or?
So remember, based on the Maryland Police Training Commission standards, supervisors and above can be considered a corporal. Now here, we don't consider that. We consider a sergeant a supervisor, but they consider corporals and above supervision, which will require certain trainings and stuff. So ideally, patrol officer would report directly to a sergeant as a supervisor, but the sergeant will report directly to a lieutenant, and that's how that goes. So the rank on the line level of patrol is usually just a patrol officer and a PFC. Where I came from, it was patrol officer, PFC, and a corporal, and we all just had a sergeant. So it's just the preference of how the commission outlines that a little bit, but that patrol officer will still report to a sergeant.
Okay, but if you have one there sergeant, but you don't have sergeant and higher. You just have
Well, that's something that would change. Certain, yeah.
Okay.
That's something that's just missed.
Yeah, I figured that was just a type error.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
I guess, so when are we approving these, as for the police department as, yes, this is it? So we'll just have to,
For the job descriptions.
yeah.
Yes.
So we'll just have to make the one sergeant and higher for the patrol officer.
I'm sorry?
So for patrol officer, we'll just have to make a change and have it sergeant and higher, correct? On the paper, it just says sergeant.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's the same thing. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we just have to add and higher.
She's just saying that one of the floors need to be updated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And higher. Okay. Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Because that way, I can see somebody now saying, well, the chief is my supervisor because it doesn't say it.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Okay.
That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. So everyone is in agreement of the job descriptions with that one edit.
Yeah, I'm good.
Very good. The next item is the consideration of approval for the hiring of Eric Beal for the community compliance specialist. It used to be, we changed the title from our code enforcement officer to the community compliance specialist. Chief?
Thank you. The actual title is actually Community Compliance Inspector, CCI.
Inspector is not even inspector. And I was thinking, I said, there's another name. It wasn't specialist, but Chief must have changed it. Okay.
So yeah, I think we all recognize that it's code enforcement. It's the old code enforcement position. We just reclassified it. We all have to get used to it because we're used to saying code enforcement. But yes, recently we had our interview processes with several candidates, and Captain Sullivan and Lieutenant Hayward went through that process, and Mr. Bill came out as the most favorable. He has completed all the prerequisites when it comes to the background investigation and the requirements of our conditional job offer. I believe Mr. Bill should be logged on, and he's on the call. If you all want to ask him any questions, or we'll go from there. Eric, hello.
Hello. Take your phone off and mute.
How are you guys? I'm Eric.
Hey, Eric.
Hello,
Nice
Eric.
to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you. So this is an opportunity just for our council members to meet you and ask you a few questions and, make you sweat a little bit. Just a tad. Just for them to meet you because you are on our agenda to approve
Eric, what is your background with code?
So I've been with,
Yeah.
I've been in public service safety service since I was 16. I've done fire investigations for the fire department, where we would go to people's houses, inspect their houses for smoke detectors, any clutterness as far as hoarding conditions, anything from making sure you don't have any bars on your basement windows, having ways of egress. I also was a police officer for the county, for Prince George's County. So I've dealt with a lot of crime as far as misdemeanors to felonies, caseloads, testimony in court, and preservation of evidence and stuff like that.
I have a
All right.
question.
Uh,
Oh, sorry,
mhm.
Mayor, go ahead.
Yes, no. Go ahead.
Um, so, so you previously served as a police officer?
Yes.
Okay, and can I ask when you decided not to do that anymore, or why you're no longer?
The county was going to underneath the, I don't know if you guys heard about the DOJ complaint that they're involved in. So that's where I decided to go ahead and part ways with that and try something else because they had a lot of stuff going on with them inside the police department internally.
Okay.
How long were you a police officer?
7 years, from 2011 until 2017.
Oh,
So
okay.
like 7.5 years.
And what are some of the agencies that you worked for?
I did Prince George's County Police during the entire time. I've done everything from patrol work to helping out robbery units with people that got carjacked or robbed. I was also the community officer for my apartment complex, which means I was the on-call officer. Whenever anything happened, they would call my personal phone. I would go out and I would take care of whatever issues. I didn't believe in calling any officers that were on duty. I would normally just take care of whatever the issue was right then and there. So it could be anything from illegal trash dumping to somebody fighting to a shooting to a robbery. If I was on the property, I had to take care of it right then and there.
Were you with the county at that time, or you were part of a security company?
I was part of the actual county. And then before the county police,
yeah.
I was a volunteer firefighter with the Boulevard Heights Fire Department.
The who?
Boulevard Heights Fire Department, volunteer fire.
Oh, okay. And that's where you got the code experience?
Mm-hmm. The inspection, like inspecting people's houses and stuff. That's where I got that experience from.
Mm-hmm. And how long did you do that?
I started that when I was 16, and it roughly went all the way into my police career to my age of 24, 25.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty good.
So have you driven around, spent any time in Edmonston yet?
Yes, I actually have. I've been around a little bit.
Okay, what might you say are some of the things that you've identified just sort of by your maybe kind of superficial review of the town of things that we need to work on?
The parking, I noticed that in the business side, a lot of residents were complaining about the parking. And then I also, when I did the walk on Saturday, noticed that a lot of the houses have like a lot of shrubbery in front, vehicles parking on the grass, which I looked at you guys' code and ordinances. I saw that was against your town code. So I've seen a couple of things that can be addressed, and I would like to address them if given the opportunity to.
Okay. So did somebody else have something?
I was going to ask him, what other things on your walk did you notice about the town, or have you ever been able to go through some of our, I guess, ordinance on property standards and things like that?
Yeah, so I did see the standard about the chain link fence in the front yard. I also looked at the one about you can have any kind of fence on the side and the rear, but the front yard, especially if it's next to Decatur Street, has to have a chain link fence. So I didn't really see that much on the walk because I was busy doing other things during the walk. But like I said, the shrubbery and the vehicles parked on the grass definitely stood out to me. And it was some other smaller things that I noticed. The parking violations is one of them. So that's a couple of things that I noticed on Saturday.
Okay. And on the parking on the grass, every code enforcement officer I think we've had a problem with parking on grass, parking on gravel, parking on bricks. We've had in the past where we've had code try to give tickets out for parking on gravel or parking on bricks, which is not parking on grass. So I hate to go through all that again.
Yeah, I definitely.
I just want to make sure that you've done, you say you've done code before, and, there are slight differences, in that. And I just don't want that headache again of people bombarding with phone calls saying, I'm on gravel and I got this ticket, or I'm on bricks, I got this ticket.
I'm kind of used to it. Like I said, with my experience as a police officer, we're writing different tickets and enforcing different laws. You will have that gray area or that area where people try to get around to get what they want.
Right.
So I'm used to it, and each situation is different. So I will have to take each situation by hand and play by ear.
I just don't want the phone calls from somebody saying, I've been parking on this, on my bricks for 20 years, and here we go again.
Right, definitely.
Mr. Cotton's laughing at us. Yeah, but I parking on grass. Yep, that's, to me, that's a ticket or a warning. Yeah, your discretion. And then Decatur Street, we have the chain link fence, but no new chain link fences are supposed to go up on Decatur. It's got to be a certain fence, which hasn't happened yet. So, all right.
Thank you, Ms. McCulley. I don't know if there are any more comments, but I'll say that unfortunately, I did not have the opportunity to speak with Mr. Eric before this evening. I briefly was introduced to him on Saturday. So I haven't reviewed a resume or anything, so I really don't know the background or other than what he's telling us tonight or what you're telling us tonight. But you seem like a wonderful individual. The only thing is I can't, I don't have a determination on whether to move forward with hiring or not. I do I have a trust in our chief's decisions, but again, I have not had the opportunity. I didn't know the process or anything. So I just wanted the council to understand where I'm coming from on that. I know a lot of times I can give positive feedback to let the council know this is a good decision and I was part of it, but this evening I cannot.
Okay.
Tracy, I have one more thing. In the past, when I was on the council, and I haven't been on for a few years, we always got a copy of the resume for whether it was a patrol officer or incoming sergeant, whatever rank it was. And on there, we got the resume from that person passed down to us and what the chief thought their starting salary should be. I don't know how, is that still going to be the procedure where each council person gets that? But the knowing what the starting salary is going to be is kind of important.
That is a good point. And again, I did not have the opportunity to review any of that. That's why I put that out to you right now. Yeah. But the resume to all of the council, we did make some changes in that where the individual would come before the council to meet and final approval. I do believe that a resume would be good for council, but it's not a requirement per se. But I know that it would be good for the final person. And Chief, I'll let you comment if you want to chime in.
So yeah, I wouldn't be familiar with what was done in the past when it came to positions, but I don't think that my intent will ever be to submit a resume to the council. You all hired a chief, so I expect you all to have confidence in the persons that I would select, and the salary will be based on the approved budget that the council approves. So we already have an approved budget. We would not operate outside of that approved budget when it comes to our salaries and wages for any position. Certainly, I think that we want to meet our individuals who are hired, but the employees who work for the police department don't report to the council and the mayor. They report to the chief of police, and I report to the mayor and council. So if there is a malfeasance or if there's an issue with that particular employee, the chief of police should be held accountable for those employees because he or she would be the person to select them. So I wouldn't be familiar with what they did in the past. That's just my personal belief on that.
Chief,
Thank you. Thank you.
What is his starting salary going to be?
We actually have, unfortunately, fortunately, but we actually have those who are not part of the council on the call, so we can't discuss. Well, we could discuss what the range is. We could discuss the range, but we cannot discuss what his salary would be.
Well, actually, you can. Because,
you said we can?
Yeah,
you can because that's public information.
Oh, wonderful.
I have a question, Councilman Johnson.
Yes, sir, Councilman.
Yes. Okay. As far as the hiring go, isn't that through the police department, or it has to be voted? I mean, come through past council.
We vote on it tonight.
Oh, okay. So it's not just a hire from the police department.
Yes.
Eric, can I address?
Right.
Yes, sir.
So you have a charter resolution that will be presented to you next council meeting that changes that back to where both departments hire the staff, and that staff person simply comes to you by policy to be introduced to the mayor first and then introduced to the council, and no formal action required. You set the budget, salary budget in the annual budget, and so that salary is specified typically for anyone starting based on what's in the budget.
The salary range.
No, it's specific. We don't do ranges.
Okay.
It is specific.
And so I think what Ms. McCulley wants to know, what is the salary?
Oh, I'm sorry. It is $45,912 in this year's budget.
Okay.
And so the important thing is, and I want to address this to the chief, we understand the policy and what it says, but there's all accountability. And accountability would mean that the mayor, being your supervisor, should be in on the hiring process or your final candidate. And so we understand that you are the chief and that there should be a trust, but we are accountable to our community. So there's information that we need prior to hiring an individual. And I know that I need that information.
I certainly agree that the council and the mayor would be involved or know a candidate that I would submit, but interviewing an employee for the police department, it should be the job of the chief of police.
You're absolutely correct.
Overreach of the legislator is what I'm hearing. What I'm saying is that what is the purpose of having a process with a chief in place if we have legislators who ultimately have to get involved and make additional decisions? That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying we don't work together. I'm saying that we're not accountable to the community that we serve. I'm saying that you have a chief in a position that was hired for a particular cause, and under the conditions of my job description, it says that these things that I do. It is not a malfeasance on my part to submit somebody, but I want to make it very clear that I adamantly disagree that interviewing a candidate for a position, that is the job of the department head. What is the purpose of having a department head?
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you. You should have a department head. The department head, just as you said, does do the interviewing, in which you assign that to the captain and the lieutenant, and you do the final, which is wonderful. In a lot of cases, that's what Mr. Barnes does as well. So no one is saying that that was wrong. And no one, if you have to bring it before the council has the right to answer the questions. Because again, we, as the mayor and council, answer to our community. And you said there's no malfeasance. That's not the issue. That's not the issue. It's called accountability. We're not questioning your integrity. It's called accountability. We can't allow individuals to that are hired to, and I think we had sort of an issue with the hiring of our recent officer, our lieutenant. So, you know, you can say one thing and then later on it's another. So I want to be able to, I supervise the town administrator as well as the police chief. So there are things that I need to, I'm sorry, Chief. I'm sorry.
I hear that you're talking, but I think you are illy incorrect in what you just said. And I have never presented any false information to the council.
Mute yourself. Sir, we're not going to be rude tonight if the discussion becomes difficult. It's not necessary, and I won't accept it. If we need to discuss this further, we can do that offline. I gave the council what I had. I had not spoken to the individual other than meeting him on a Saturday.
Oh,
I gave them where I was coming from. If they want to make a decision because I don't vote, they can do that.
Mayor, I'm not arguing that point. I understand it. What you just said, though, was that I present false information to the council, and that is incorrect. What I do is I present things within policy. If the town does not have the policy in place or the ordinance in place, how am I to follow something that's not there? Like, I'm not arguing the point, but I find offensive that somebody would think that I would do something against the department that I serve. That's not true at all.
Sir, no one said that.
We can continue later. I understand.
When the lieutenant was hired, he was hired as what? I'm sorry, sir?
You asking me a question?
Yes.
What was it?
Lieutenant Hayward was hired as?
A lieutenant.
Well, he was under the impression he was the officer, just a patrol officer.
All of us are officers or patrol officers, so the
clarification.
Well, I'm talking about, well, it was,
there
never mind. I don't want to get into it.
Oh,
thank you, Mr. Johnson.
And to make it very clear, his rank never came up in a discussion with the council, because I was even told that it wasn't an issue to come up to the council with the rank, that you all needed to see the candidate. So I did what I was asked to do.
Thank you, Chief. So what we're going to do tonight, we have a code of, no, that's not it. It's the community compliance. And what's the other community compliance? It's not specialist.
Inspector.
Inspector. So we're going to be presenting that position tonight.
On the paper, it says specialist.
Yeah, it was, Chief mentioned that wasn't correct.
Rod put the wrong title. I don't know why I had the other one in my head. I must have heard it, and so I didn't just clarify it. I apologize. That was my mistake.
So on the agenda tonight is the consideration of approval for the hiring of the Community Compliance Inspector Council.
All right, and his salary will be $45,912, correct?
That's a question for you, Chief Harris.
Yes, ma'am.
His starting salary will be $45,912, is that correct?
Yes,
all right.
sir.
And when would he start?
He has to give a current job notice, so I'm assuming not this paper, the next paper, so it'll be the end of October sometime.
Okay.
Bandit.
And I have one more question.
This is the first time it's ever happened.
Noreen's doing okay.
Sounds like Councilmember Chester's walking her dog.
Yes.
First time ever. You don't need to be such an asshole.
Chief, I have one more
Mute.
question.
Mute.
In the
Hillary,
past,
mute.
Well, then keep your dog on the leash and out of my yard all the time. This is the first time. All right, dude.
Chief, I have one more
First
question.
time.
In the past, we had hired an officer when I was on council before. He had several
Thank you.
part-time jobs along with that we didn't know of. Now I'm talking part-time jobs. I'm not talking of jobs where I know some officers have their own little business, which is fine and dandy. But he actually worked for other people, and there was times where he should have been working here with us, but he had his other job, and things were kind of arranged so he could. What I'm asking, I guess, is he also working part-time for other people, or is this going to be his full-time job and we're not going to have issues with him halfway through a shift and then leaving us to go work for somebody else?
Well, he will be governed according to our policies, which that is not allowed. And then when it comes to secondary employment during work hours with the town, that is double dipping and it's time theft. So that's a situation where somebody would definitely be terminated. And our police officers right now, secondary employment has to be approved through a certain process in accordance with our personnel manual. So, but double dipping isn't tolerated. It's theft, and people are terminated. But Eric would certainly resign from his current job, to come work for us full time.
Okay. No, it was an issue before. I like the answer. Thank you.
I'll second that too.
Good question.
Councilmember McCauley, it's actually in the personnel policy and guidelines for any employee in the town that they have to get approval for a secondary employment prior to doing that activity, and whether it would conflict with their existing job, like Chief Harris indicated.
Okay. Does that also include if they are self-employed through themselves?
I can't remember the wording in terms of self-employment, but I know it definitely does for outside employment.
Okay. No, I mean, self-employment, they can work around their own schedule.
I would say,
Right.
yeah. Yeah. Wow,
Okay.
good. And again, thank you, Ms. McCulley.
You're welcome.
So is there anything else for this particular subject of the community compliance inspector? If not, we will move on. The next item of consideration for approval is the police department's general order pertaining to body cameras. Chief or council, you have any questions, comments?
You all can refer to, I guess, the updated body camera order that we recently sent out. I know Sue Ellen had some additional comments she wanted to potentially add. So I'll give her the floor. And Hillary, the comments that you had sent us have already been updated in the copy that I sent.
And Mayor and Council, I have reviewed the body camera general order, and generally speaking, it's a good order. The changes that I'm proposing to the chief are clarifications, primarily about consent, a number of other specifics. So it's not changing anything in substance. I think you can just go ahead with the understanding that I will be talking to him about adding in a couple of things just to clarify the policy, but it's not going to be substantive changes.
Ms. Turner?
Yeah, I just, well, first I wanted to say that I think this policy looks excellent. And in my view is, you know, as someone who works on this issue in my day job, I feel like this is something that I would hold up as something for other agencies to be following. So I'm very excited about that. I did have some comments that I shared with the chief over the weekend. that I see are addressed, and that was mainly having to do with, you know, who would have access to the footage, particularly in the case of a significant event of some kind involving an officer. And I see that there's been some stuff that's been added relative to that under section 14. So I think that's really great. I had a few questions that are primarily for clarification that probably don't require any amendment. So if I could just go through those pretty quickly. Mayor, would that be all right?
Absolutely.
So under section 2, sorry, it's dinner time in my house. Section 2.5, or just section 2 generally, I'm wondering how we can ensure that officers are actually keeping these on, right? Like, this is a great policy, but what kind of checks will exist? And I don't know if there's any, I might have missed it in the policy, but it seems like having some kind of routine, you know, just going back and looking at to make sure that footage is actually there, and that officers are keeping them on.
I believe so. In the policy, it talks about the body cam coordinator doing the review to when they're doing the review to check for that compliance, and that's part of that compliance and making sure that they're recording and uploading as throughout their day.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So that was one of the comments I put in early on, and then was probably taken care of if something was discussed later in the.
There's also a requirement that an audit be done at various times.
Okay, that's great. I
Audit.
know that was before the chief came. This was a problem.
Yeah.
So, and then I had a question about under mandatory recording. This says, unless unsafe, impossible, or impractical to do so, you know, employees must activate their BWC. So what would be impractical? I just don't want this to be an exception that swallows the rule. Or could we just delete that?
So an impractical time would be like if we're for example, if I'm docking the recording before I leave, right? I'm docking into the station and I leave the station, and something happens and I jump and I engage for some reason, then I wouldn't necessarily have the recording. Or if there's a reason where, you know, I've seen situations where officers have jumped out the cars and haven't turned it on, but we've addressed that with the OSP program, so that if they're pulling out weapons or anything like that, the body cams are automatically activated. The reason for that was I was thinking about situations like I've literally left here before and I've engaged in something, or it's just really detailed situations where it's very random that may happen. And if they engage in something, or call out with something on the middle of the road on the way home, they wouldn't necessarily have the camera on them because it's already been docked.
Okay.
So that would be somewhere where it wouldn't be practical to have the recording.
And then that would still be an instance when there would have to be an explanation, right, in the report relative to why the camera wasn't on.
So an officer's memorandum would have to be sent up to why a situation occurred or incident occurred with the incident report on why it was not recorded, and that coordinator would have to review it. But it have to go in that situation has to go all the way up to me to review on why a situation occurred and we didn't have a recording.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. It sort of sounds like what you're talking about are exigent circumstances.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we want to say that instead of impractical, because impractical to me could be really subjective.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I agree with that.
So that would be my suggestion there.
Could I interfere a little bit?
Yeah.
The language that the chief is using is language that is used pretty much across Maryland.
Okay.
You could add in exigent, but if that's really standard language, just being used in a lot of policies. So, and I think that was Maryland Police Training Commission also originally would be approving of that type of language. Just, you could add exigent in though.
Well, I know we address exigent circumstances later on in the policy, so I don't know if we need to add exigent, but if that's, I mean, if this is sort of the standard that's used across those other agencies, I'm a little more comfortable with it.
Yeah, a lot.
But
That's very phrasing.
yeah, it is. Okay, so I'm cool with that, so we can move on. Then I had a question under section 4, exceptions to recording. And this is something I raised before, section 4.2. Would it just be easier for us to say here that an employee should record the request of the person who says they don't want to be recorded? Like, I think that would be better for the officer too, right? Because then you've got documentation of.
One of the suggestions that I'm making to the chief is that there also be a reference in there to obtaining the consent on camera. And then also, it would also, and then if someone doesn't want to be recorded, you offer just to do an audio instead of a visual and audio. And if they don't want that, then it all be on tape so that it's
Yep.
clear that the person, if they allow that part. You can't make somebody allow you to record them. You do need their consent.
Sure. Okay, that's even better. Okay, that's great. And let's see, and then the last. I just wanted to understand a little bit more under section 10. This is the first part of that section where it says the employee's body-worn camera may live stream a recording via evidence.com in order to be viewed by assigned personnel in real time. What is that?
So with the new system, it allows me to log in, or the body camera coordinator to log in live as they're actually in the car or they're on a scene of something to review a recording. In the previous, and at one point, that wasn't the case. You couldn't review live recordings. You always had to wait till the upload was done. But with the cloud-based system in our storage, for some reason, if I needed to log on really quickly to see what was going on, I could do so from my computer.
Okay.
Once the camera has started recording. We can't, like, I wouldn't be able to activate it remotely.
Okay. And later on, we say that facial recognition is prohibited, because that's what I was a little bit concerned about, is there being some kind of doing live streaming and then also attempting to identify people through a super faulty system of facial recognition. So, okay, no, that's helpful to know. And then so then I had a question under section 14 related to public access to the recording. And so I have one question, and one is, so we say that members of the public can get access after approval of a properly submitted Maryland Public Information Act request. And what I want to make sure of is that, you know, with a lot of these public information laws, there's a number of exceptions included in them. And I don't want us to be in a situation where there's some, you know, there's an officer involved shooting. And because that is under investigation by the county, that somehow that fits into an exception of the public information law that wouldn't allow the body-worn camera footage to be disclosed. Because I think it's in those kinds of scenarios when jurisdictions hold on to this footage that it ends up being very bad for the jurisdiction to not just release it. And I don't want us to kind of shield ourselves behind exceptions that are found in the public information. Yes, Sue Ellen.
Chief, I'm butt in, but this does bump into a legal requirement too. There are certain types of records that the town is not allowed to disclose at certain points, and others where it has discretion. So those that they're not allowed to, that we cannot override the state law about that. Others where there's discretion, but there's a real question, generally, I'll get a question about it, for one thing, because people aren't sure whether they should be disclosing or not disclosing. So we're very careful about that when it comes to these kinds of records. But if the state law says they're not to be disclosed at that point, that's the end of it. There's no way around that. There is an option which can be used anytime, and whenever the town declines to give a record, it's noted. You can go to the ombudsman. There's a Maryland Public Information Act person to talk to at the state level who will kind of mediate these issues and put pressure on governments if they think that, in fact, the record should be disclosed. And you don't have to pay anything to get that. You can just ask for it. It's not a court matter. So
what I wonder, see, like you can't, we couldn't release it pursuant to the Maryland Public Information Act because there's maybe an exception that applies.
Right.
But what I'm wondering is if we could just say that, and usually that also takes a little bit longer anyway to go through a Public Information Act request. So what I'm wondering is if we could just have an additional provision in here that says, in response to a public request for access, at the discretion of the chief of police, it could be, or frankly, I guess I don't know if it should be the chief or the mayor, that at their discretion, pursuant, assuming that it doesn't violate any other existing Maryland laws that would cover it, that they could go ahead and just release the footage in their own discretion.
Well, the mayor, usually there's someone that's given that job, but obviously the legislature can decide, you all can decide who handles MPIA requests. And right now, they've really shortened up the time. You have to respond within 10 days of getting the request as to whether you can hand it over right away or whether it's going to take a while to put it together, and if you expect there to be any costs involved, which sometimes there is on these, because you have to put it into a format that can then be handed over. So that's there, and that's 30 days is the maximum time. I think towns are usually a lot better about adhering to those limits than the state and the county are, because they're so much bigger. It's just hard to find who to talk to, even. So it would be hard. In terms of this, it should be really a policy for MPIA generally, not just really the police department. They're having to, what everybody else has to follow. And there are policies out there that say, if it's one of these things, you hand it over immediately. You don't charge them for it, you don't, and you're encouraged to do that by the MPIA. But if, to get into anything, some of these are fairly complicated to decide as to what's being asked for and if there's an exception. Because if you hand over information that you're not allowed to, there's a fine that goes along with that, for the person handing it over. But everyone has to be careful. It's good to have a strong MPIA policy that everybody knows what it is and you follow it. And then many times, in some places I represent, if they're going to decline to hand over something, they have to check it through the attorney, or they have to check it through somebody else in the chain of command, just to make sure that's okay.
So I guess what I'm not understanding is that excluding the MPIA, right? Like, say that this happens one night and we want to release it the next day. We don't even, you know, because there's people in our town that are asking for it, or because there's like members of the press that are asking for it. And we don't want to, you know, that we don't even want to wait for anyone to fill out a specific request. We just want to release the footage.
If you're going to release footage, regardless of whether it's in response to a request or not, usually it's because it needs to be protected because somebody's rights are getting affected. And so there's rights of any number of people involved. And the state has said there are certain things that you are not allowed to hand over during a certain period of time, except to certain people, such as the person who's being filmed. So that's why there's no requirement that you wait. You can have your own policy say, we'll give it as soon as we can. But the limits on what gets handed over are still there, and you cannot override those. The state says what that is. Regardless of whether somebody asks for it, even just verbally. In a lot of towns, you don't have to put in a written request. Somebody calls up or sends an email in or whatever and says, you answer it. That's fine.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that I don't think this policy provides for that with the body-worn camera footage, for us to just be able to say, someone's asked for it. If there's no provision of state law that prohibits us from turning it over, we're going to turn it over.
Well, if you want that just to apply in your police department, sure, you could have it apply to everybody. But if that's how you want it to read, as long as it doesn't violate the MPIA restrictions, then you can hand it over as soon as you want to. And you can tell people to do that. That's your policy.
Yeah, so what I'm suggesting is that maybe under section 14.1 here, that we have a provision that says, you know, notwithstanding any other provision of law that would prohibit the disclosure, that we can, at the discretion of, you know, the mayor, release the footage to the public.
And you're referring only to time. You're not saying that if the MPIA prevents the disclosure, you're going to override that.
No, we're not. No, of course not. I'm not
just talking about time.
Yeah. Like, because I think that's just having watched this unfold in other jurisdictions. Like, I really feel like people get hung up on what they can release and do they have the authority to do it and blah, blah, blah. And so if we said, notwithstanding any laws that would prohibit the disclosure, you know, the mayor can press go and just get this out there so that we can, you know, make
it sounds like we need to have another discussion about this because it's almost 7 o'clock and you have a lot, Ms. Turberville, and good points. It just seems like we need to talk about it some more. I don't know if you need to talk about it with the chief or with Ms. Ferguson.
I mean, it sounds like we could actually go ahead and move ahead with this tonight. I don't have any other questions. That was it. I'd be comfortable with moving ahead with this, but maybe what we could do is look at adopting a policy around how we deal with Public Information Act requests. If other towns are doing that, and that would cover the body-worn camera footage, that would help us figure out who is the decider within our town government. So, you know,
yeah,
who makes those calls?
That might be important at this point.
Okay, but otherwise, that was it. So
yeah,
thank you.
I do have a question though. I'm not quite understanding how and in what case a police officer would be able to do audio only as opposed to, you know, video footage if most of our officers are answering a call. I don't know how easy it is to switch to, I guess with these cameras, it might be easy to switch to just audio. But to me, that's also, that falls into a slight bit of an issue, because you never know what's happening unless there's the person specifically says, I don't know for what reason they would say they don't want to be on camera. Just have just a little bit of issue with changing that to flipping it to audio only. There may be an issue when you're interviewing someone, maybe, for certain things, but I think maybe something else needs to be said with that going to just audio. And I think it might be a lot for our officers if they're on a call to actually switch from video to audio. It might be an integrity issue as well.
That was my suggestion. It's not, and it was to have some kind of middle ground, because if a person does not want to be on the video or the audio, they can say no, and then you have nothing. So there's an idea of sometimes you can just ask for that middle ground. It can happen if you're in somebody's house, there are other people there, there are children.
Yeah.
Any number of things that you don't want to be taped. But I can take, that was just a suggestion.
If I could just ask for everyone to mute your phone or your video, because we're hearing a little kickback. Thank you, everyone. Okay, Ms. Ferguson.
Yeah, that was just to get some record, because you do have to have consent. If you're gonna, like, witnesses, victims, that type of thing, and if they don't want to be on camera for some reason, they can say they don't want to be taped at all. But if you can offer just the audio, at least maybe you can get that part. That's the only suggestion. It's just a middle ground. It doesn't have to be in there. It's just a suggestion.
Okay. So do we feel comfortable with moving forward, council, with the possibility of a few edits?
I feel good with it.
Ms. Tuberville?
Me too.
All right, and Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, I'm all right with.
Ms. Chester?
What?
I said, and Ms. Chester, but she might be
She
dealing with the person.
Like,
She might be tearing somebody apart right now. All right, thank you. I'm just
Sorry, no, I was on mute.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I'm safe in my house. It's just our dog. That's ongoing dog problem.
So for the sake of time, I just ask that the council just briefly look over what the other items are that we're going to go over, because I want you to have an opportunity just to have a break in between. And it's like 6:59 now. So is there anything that you might have question on that the remaining 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, no.
I'm good with it all.
Yeah, 9. You're good?
Good.
I'm good.
Everybody's good? Okay. So I just want to go ahead and adjourn this meeting and allow a 5-minute break. And then we can return to our regular town hall meeting. Okay? Is that good with everyone?